right, just let's open up in prayer and then we can start. Thank you, Father, for this wonderful opportunity to discuss your word. Thank you for your family getting together just to discuss your word and your truth. Thank you for the revelation that you want to share with us. Father, I just ask that you be with me and help me to speak your truth and help me to reveal what you revealed to me. I ask it all in the mighty name of Yeshua Mashiach. Amen. All right, so tonight we continue with the Aleph-Bet. Last time we did the Samech, and just to quickly recap, the Samech was all about the presence of Yahweh coming down into the physical. It's about the power of Yahweh. It's also about cycles. We also saw the connection with the Moedim and the creation cycle, and it's all about connecting with him. And tonight is basically just continuing the conversation around connecting with Yahweh, but in a different medium. So Ayin is a very interesting topic. If I can get the slide to move on to the next one, just a sec. There you go. Okay, so Ayin, the main topics we're going to discuss tonight is the first meaning, which everybody know about by this time. Ayin means eye or sight, and on a spiritual level it means insight. So it's about seeing something in the physical or seeing something in the spiritual, or seeing or get a revelation from something in the spiritual. But when we look at the further meaning of Ayin, we'll discover a few other things that were not really prevalent at that time before studying this letter. So the first one is the connection or relationship between the eye and the concept of a fountain. That was something that really stretched my brain a bit, and I couldn't connect that at first. And there's also a connection with the Father in that regard. And then we're also going to look at Ayin, how it relates to the mind, the brain, and knowledge. Then we're going to see the Ayin's connection to the tree of knowledge and the creation story. The also relationship between Ayin and nakedness, which also links to light. Then Ayin's connection to Yeshua, because Ayin is found within the name Yeshua. It's the last letter of the name Yeshua. And then also Ayin being Primeval light, or the beginning of all light. Genesis 3:1, when Yahweh said, "Let there be light," that's also connected to Ayin. And then also the connection between Ayin and Samech and Yahweh's presence. So those are the main topics for tonight's study. Now, on the top, you'll see the different depictions of Ayin. First, the pictograph, which looked like an eye. And then there's one that looks like a circle, which is basically similar to Samech. And then we see the Ayin as we know it in the Hebrew language, which looks like a letter Y in the English language. Now, Ayin is the 16th letter of the Aleph-Bet, and it's the 7th last letter, finishing up the Aleph-Bet. So number 16 is made up of two numbers, which is number 10, which relate to the letter Yod, which represents the hand of anointing, or the invisible hand of Yahweh, and also the number 6, which connects to Vav, which is man. So we get the idea of a hand on the head of man, which is the anointing. But in this case, the anointing is about releasing insight as a result of that anointing. Now, Ayin has got positive meanings and negative meanings. The positive meanings are connected to the eye, or to sight, also to a fountain or a spring. It also means an outward appearance, to stand before someone. It's representing color, to be content, countenance, or face. That's also found in the Aaronic blessing, where Yahweh's countenance is lifted. And then also the meaning knowledge, to look, presence, to regard, and to resemble, and sight. There's also negative meanings connected to Ayin, and that is conceit, vanity, affliction, and to displease. Now, normally when I discussed the Ayin previously, because it's normally on the left, it's always linked to the negative side of the meaning, which has to do with vanity or with the fleshly desires. But in this study, we'll more focus on the positive meanings, which has to do with knowledge, the presence, sight or insight, and the fountain. Now, Ayin looks like the letter Y, and as you can see with that picture with the human brain, that connects the eye, or the left and the right eye, connected to the mind or to the brain, and that's where you get the left and the right indication of what sight is. So it's physical sight as well as spiritual sight, and we're going to look at both of those. Now, Ayin as a fountain. As I said, that was really mind-boggling when I thought of that, because the eye is not a fountain. The eye is a sensor where you can actually sense light or images, and you receive those images inside of your mind. But when I thought about how the eye worked, it really revealed to me what this fountain represents. Now, a fountain or a spring is a place of origin where there's something coming from that place of origin. And that's where normally water comes from. And that links to the name Av, or Father. That means originator. So the Father's got the same attributes as the letter Ayin. That's a place of origin, or where things originate from. Now the Ayin, or the eye, is also linked to sight. And eyesight can only be working when there's light involved. So we can't really see without light. And that's where the fountain is connected to the Ayin, but the fountain of light, where there's light originating from the eye, from your perspective, and giving an image into your mind. So when you look towards the outward or towards creation, the eye is the fountain or the gateway where you access information through the medium of light to what is external of you. And light needs to be present for that fountain of light, which is your eye, to work in order to receive that information. Now, looking at the fountain or spring, it's normally something that gives life or sustenance. And in this case, this fountain of light has got similar attributes. It gives us something that will benefit us at the end of the day. So that's the connection between the eye and the fountain from our perspective as created beings, but how it works from the eye inside into the mind. Now, when we look at the Ayin from Yahweh's perspective, we discovered that when we receive an image through the eye into the brain, we can also receive an image from Yahweh into his creation. And that's where his light goes through the source, which is the fountain of light, which is the Ayin that shines down into his creation. So that is like a lens where his light is projected into the physical that then create the physical realm. Now, Ayin is the number 70, which is connected to cycles, which is also connected to the letter Samech that we discovered last time. So we see the cycles or the presence of Yahweh coming down through the Samech, but in this case, we see a different medium because the Samech is connected to his presence and strength, but this time we look at the medium of light, not his presence and not his strength. So it's another medium, but it's the same principle. So Samech and Ayin is related in that regard. Now, the light that comes from Yahweh, because he is light, is the word Or, which is Aleph-Bet. So that's what I define as the higher light, the light that directly radiates from the Father. He is the originator of all light. And then it goes through this Ayin concept, or this lens, or the spring of light, or the fountain of light. that is perceived from the physical as something that gives light into the physical. Now, science has discovered that photons are the smallest building block of all matter. So the ayin translates Yahweh's light into a lower light, which is the physical realm's light. And it also creates everything into the physical from the basis of the photon being the building block. So everything in the physical is like a canvas where Yahweh's light is projected through the lens of the ayin from the source of the ore that originates from Av, or the Father, and that creates the reality. And when we look at the physical realm, the light, which is the sun and the moon and the stars, everything that gives light in the physical, then or produces the light that goes through our ayin or our lens into our brain and paints the picture into our canvas of our mind of our reality, which is the physical realm of which we are part of. So we see the same pattern, that is the eye working inside the mind, creating an image. We see the higher pattern of Yahweh's light going through the ayin or the eye or the fountain, creating an image, which is the creation or the physical. So that's that concept of Yahweh shining his higher light, creating the physical into the lower light, which is basically Genesis 1 verse 3, where Yahweh said, let there be light. That's a primeval light, or the original light through which he created everything, which is the basic building blocks of his physical realm or his creation. Now, to depict that, I've got a little picture there of a lens and the highlight and the lower light, and the lens of the eye and shining through, casting the image. So that's one of the screens that capture the physical. So in total, what we perceive from the physical realm, there are basically three screens. The first one, as I described, is the physical creation, which is that screen of Yahweh's light casting his image of his mind, of his plan of what creation should look like, and it manifests into the physical through the lens of the ayin. And the second screen is what I described, what's happening in your mind when the light, which is in the physical, goes through the lens of your eye and creates an image in your mind. The third screen is what's in the front of your mind. The eye works projecting the image at the back of your mind. The third screen is what we call your imagination, where you visualize something. So when you close your eyes and you think about an apple or a carrot or a car or whatever, you'll physically see that in your mind's eye. Now that's the screen in your mind that also connects to Yahweh's higher light, where he casts an image into your screen, into your mind, and that is what we perceive or read in a scripture that is called visions and dreams. And from your point of view, that's what you call your imagination. So the same pattern, it's like a holographic concept, exists for creation, exists for your eye and how you perceive light and images, but it's also your connection to Yahweh. Use the same symbolism or mechanisms as described through the concept of the ayin. Now, there's a relationship between the two words or and or. Now, or, spelled with an ayin, is the one on the right, means skin, hide, or leather. Now, or, if you change the ayin to an aleph, it means light. So there's a relationship between the two and a connection between the two based on their sound or their pronunciation, and that's called homophones. So having the same sound in Hebrew mind also connects them through Hebrew poetry. So those two concepts are connected to one another. Now, what's interesting about the word or, which is spelled with an ayin, it's that from its root word, is the word ur, that means to become naked or to make bare. And we know that the connection is also there when Adam and Eve ate from the fruit that they saw that looked good. They lost their glory and they were naked. and they hid themselves. So that concept of nakedness is also seen with the glory that covered them, that was removed, and their nakedness that was exposed through the sight of seeing the fruit that they desired, which was the forbidden fruit. But what's interesting here is that the root word for or, which is hide, skin, or leather, means to become naked or to make bare. And there's only one scripture in the whole of the Bible that use that word, and that's in Habakkuk 3 verse 9, where it talks about his bow was made naked or was made bare. And that was something that really wrecked my brain a bit, thinking about it. How is nakedness connected to a bow? And what does it mean? And then it struck me when I remember the verse in Revelation 6. We talk about the Lamb opening the first seal, and there was a man on the white horse who had a bow but without arrows. So that means that he was made bare from removing the arrows, and the bow and arrow was the completeness of the function of the archer. So if you remove the arrows, you actually make him bare. So it's a bare bow. It doesn't really have any effect anymore and doesn't have any relevance, because you remove the essence of that in order to be an archer. In the same way, you can have an artist and you remove his brush and his paint. You can't really say if he's an artist, because he can't demonstrate it, because he doesn't have the means to exercise and express himself as an artist. So that's actually the concept of to be made bare. You lose your function by being made naked, of losing the essence of what gives you that function in the first place. Now that links to the concept of, or links to the story of Lucifer. Lucifer was called the bearer of light, and he lost the light that he was carrying, and that made him naked, or lost his ability to fulfill his function as the light bearer. And that became evident when I looked at the word for arrow. And that's the word chatz, which is chetzadik, which means an arrow, a spear, a rod or a tree, or a lightning bolt. And it struck me when I realized that the arrows were actually arrows of light, like little lightning bolts. And if he was the bearer of light, he had a quiver full of arrows of light. And when he fell, Yahweh removed the light from him, and he was no longer the light bearer, having no more arrows that contained light. And that is confirmed in Habakkuk 3 verse 11, in the verse that says, the sun and the moon stood still in their places at the flashes of your flying arrows. So we see that the flying arrows were flashes, like lightning bolts, and at the brightness of your shining spear. You march across the earth with fury, you threshed the nations in wrath. So we can see that the connection there is in relation to shooting these arrows of light in the context of the end time judgment. So we see that the truth and the revealing of the truth is depicted by this archer who actually have the arrows to shoot the truth. So we'll have a look at what that means a bit later on. So from Habakkuk 3:11, we see the flashes of flying arrows, and we also see the meaning of chatz, which is a lightning bolt. So, and what is the purpose of these arrows? Now that is revealed when you read 2 Kings 9 verse 24, where it tells a story about Jehu, who drew his bow and shot Joram between the shoulders and pierced his heart. So Jehu means Yahweh exists, and Jehoram means Yahweh is exalted, or the insight of having Yahweh as the exalted one and Yahweh as the one that exists. So these arrows are meant to shoot at the hearts of man, to give them the essence of what these arrows are made of. And we know that light is linked to truth or revelation. So these bolts of light or arrows of light are designed to impale the hearts of man in order to enlighten their hearts, or to change their hearts, or to give them new hearts. And that will give you the revelation or the insight that Yahweh exists, that He is the Creator, and that He is the exalted one. He is the highest authority of anything that exists with Him, His creation. He is beyond that. He's higher than that. So that gives us the full picture of what this nakedness has to do with light, and the removing of the essence of truth, which are depicted by arrows, basically make you naked and expose your nakedness. So what happened when Lucifer lost the ability to carry that light? Yahweh gave it through Messiah to the believers in Messiah. They now carry the arrows of truth, and we as followers of Messiah have the obligation to shoot these arrows of truth into the hearts of man, so that they can become new creation, new creatures, having a new heart and a new nature. And Lucifer no longer are called Lucifer because he lost his destiny as the light bearer. He's now called the devil, or the opposer, also known as Hasatan. And that's one of the reasons he is angry at specifically those following Messiah, because we are basically doing what he was supposed to do, to give revelation of who Yahweh is to his creation. Now, when we look at this concept of a lightning bolt striking you into your heart, giving you insight, it's the same as having a camera taking a picture with a flash. Now, the photosensitive material can only be exposed for a short period of time to give it the light, to give the full picture. If you overexpose it, it will just be a blob of light. If it's underexposed, you won't really see something. So the flash of light is basically what we know is that aha moment. When you have that revelation in that moment of time, Yahweh reveals it to you, and then when you meditate on it, it becomes part of you. It's the same way that revelation, or that little lightning bolt of truth that hits you, comes to life. And that's basically how we work. So Yahweh wants to reveal truth to us. And as we meditate on his word, he will give us those little flash aha moments where we will capture that truth and make it part of our lives. Now, the concept of these arrows of light or lightning bolts is also found within Matthew 24, and also within the creation story in Genesis 1. Now, Matthew 24:27, you read about the appearing of the Messiah, and it will be as lightning that will shoot from the east to the west. Now, if you think about what the east is, it's the origin of light, and the west depicts the sea, or the ocean, or the nations. And the sea and the ocean, in relation to creation story, is the original state of the earth. It was dark and full of emptiness and void, and the Spirit of Yahweh hovered over the waters. And he said, let there be light. It's like a lightning bolt striking the water, and then the photons, which is the building blocks of all creation, came to life, and then Yahweh spoke everything into existence through his power. So it's the same concept when Messiah will appear again as that same lightning bolt striking the water. He will recreate the new heavens and the new earth, and recreate humanity and his creation that's been defiled. So that's just a few things that's related to this concept of these lightning bolts of truth, and how it relates to the beginning, creation, as well as the end, the appearing of Messiah. And we're going to look a bit more about how the Messiah is depicted within the context of light and the origin of light, which is the Father. Now, when we look at the two words or and or, as I said, the one with the iron is the skin or leather or nakedness. and the one with the Aleph is light, or the glory that covered man before they sinned. So when man sinned, they lost the glory, and their nakedness was exposed. So that nakedness is symbolic of their shortcomings, their sinfulness, any hollow place, anything that is in a fallen state, that is depicted by this concept of nakedness. So when Yahweh wants to restore us, he will cover that nakedness again with his glory, just like it was in the beginning, and that skin will then be changed with light. And when Yahweh look at you, he will only see that light. So that's where the concept of the robe of righteousness comes in, which is found in Isaiah 61 and in Revelation 19. And that robe of righteousness is what will cover you to hide your fallen nature. Now, in saying that, there are only two things that can cover nakedness. The first one is light, as we saw in creation, when Yahweh created man in a perfect state. They were covered with his glory, his or, with the Aleph, and they radiated his light. So when Yahweh looked at Adam and Chava, he saw that glory. He didn't see anything beneath that, because that glory radiated from them. But when they sinned, their nakedness or their sinfulness was exposed. And what did they do? They hid themselves. How do you hide yourself or cover your nakedness? If it's not by light, it is through darkness. And darkness is also like a garment that will hide your nakedness. That's why sinners want to walk in darkness, and they love darkness because it covers their nakedness and their shame. But we, as believers in Messiah, we don't want to cover our nakedness with darkness or with lies and garments of sin. We want to cover it again with the glory, which is the righteousness, which is also the word tzaddik. We're going to see that connection a bit later on when we look at the tree of life. So that's a beautiful picture of how our nakedness will be covered with his light, and that's the restoration of the fallen state of humanity into the glorious state, back the way it was in the beginning. So Yahweh's light. Now this is just giving us an idea of the connection between the Father and the Son in relation to light. Now we know that Yahweh is the light. He's also the Father, or the originator. That means that all light originates from him. The higher light, as we discovered, is called Or, which is Aleph-Bet, which is the light that directly radiates from him. But in saying that, it's the same as when you look at the sun. The rays of the sun, or the light of the sun, is very bright coming from the sun, but it is more intense if you would have gone inside of the sun itself. So the light coming from the sun is at a lower level as the light that is contained within the one that creates that light, for example, the sun. In the same way, the Father is the originator of light. He is of a higher energy or a higher source of light than the light radiating from him, which is the higher light, or this Or. And that word Or, when we look at the different letters, it actually gives us a picture of Messiah. Now, Aleph, like we know, is also connected to YHVH through the number 26, where the Vav is diagonal in the middle between the two yods, making the Aleph, and the two yods are 10 each. Adding to the 6 gives you 26, and YHVH also add up to 26, connecting the Aleph to Yahweh, which is the original or the originator of all light. So the Or radiates from him, and that is the symbol of the Aleph. Now the next letter is the Vav, which means man. So this means it's a lower level of expressing of this light in the form of a man, which is the Vav. And then we get the Resh, which is the head or the leader. So we see that the light, who is Yahweh, is also man, and he is the leader or the authority of all men. And through him, all light radiates. And he is in direct connection to the Father, the originator of that light, but he is the link between the Father and those who are receiving his light. And that's basically the picture of the Messiah. Now, I've got a picture there of a lightning bolt coming through. So I was thinking about how is the highest form of light generated? And in connection to what I discovered with the arrow, it's a lightning bolt. So it's like a release of power within an instant. And it's a very bright light that's created and a lot of power that is released. So the concept of that in relation to this light, or the origin of light, is like having this tremendous energy source which creates this very, very high potential difference. Now, potential difference is, in other words, voltage, a very high voltage that will create the potential to release that power to a lower potential or zero voltage or ground level. So if you think about it, a centimeter or 10 millimeters, if you have a spark or a little lightning bolt of 10 millimeters, it's about 10,000 volts. Now we know that the normal lightning bolt is much, much further apart as that. So it's trillions of volts that is generating that lightning strike. And when we read Revelation, it talks about lightning and earthquakes and thunders. So it's all about this very high potent energy source that is releasing its power to strike that of lower potential or lowest energy source. So that's where that extreme energy or light is released. Now, when we compare Yahweh to being that very high energy potential difference, Yeshua is the lightning bolt that connects that source of light to the lowest part where that light will be released to. Now, the lowest part or lowest potential is actually drawing the light onto itself, or that lightning bolt onto itself, because of its potential. The lower the potential, the higher the chance of that lightning bolt striking you. So in relation to that, it means that the Messiah will always fill the lowest part, the darkest spot, and release the power of the light that comes from Yahweh into that hollow spot, or into that dark spot, or into that spot of imperfection, to fill it with himself. And that's what Paul basically taught about in Ephesians chapter 2, where he says that he fills everything everywhere with himself. And that's our purpose as well, because we are like this higher potential energy source that's got the ability to release it to any source of potential that's lower than us, to fill that gap that exists within the fallen state. So Messiah is basically depicted by the lightning bolt. Yahweh is this high potential, and sin or sinners are the lowest form or the lowest potential, and you will automatically flow to fill that. Now, when we look at that in the context of judgment, now judgment is actually Yahweh appearing through the Messiah, and we see the symbolism of the lightning bolts in front of us, as I mentioned. So those who will not be judged are those of higher potential. So the higher your potential in a voltage range, the closer you are to the source of the potential, the weaker the influence will be on you. And the lower you are, or the further removed you are from him, the higher the impact of release will be, up to a point of destruction. So if you have no light in you, it will totally consume you and fill you with himself, and there will be nothing left of you. But if you have light in you, it's only the darkness and the sin and the imperfections and things that's not from him that will be consumed. And that concept is found in the book of Luke, where it describes how we will be judged one day. We will be judged through fire, and it will be like sticks and rubble that will be consumed, but we will be saved, but through fire. So that's the concept of being exposed to this extreme high energy, pure energy source, which is Yahweh, in the symbolism of the scientific picture of the lightning. So that's something that I really found profound, and because I understand electrical things, it really resonated with me. So just to recap, those who are in darkness or have evil in them, Ra'ah, they are bare and naked, and they will draw down these arrows of light onto themselves in the day that Yahweh will appear, but then it will be too late and Yahweh will consume them. But they who have light in them, they will stand, and only the darkness that were contained within them will be destroyed. So that is basically what Zechariah 14 and Revelation is all about. So moving on to the next one. Ayin is made up of a Zion and a Yod. So I've got a picture there on the right. Now Zion means sword and Yod means hand. So it makes sense to have a sword in a hand, but it adds up to the number 17. Now Ayin is the number 16, or the 16th letter of the Aleph-Bet. Number 17 is the letter Pei. The letter Pei now connects to a sword and a hand, and that automatically jumps to the book of Revelation, chapter 19, where it talks about the sword that came from the mouth of Messiah, and the concept of the sword in the hand, which is the anointed hand of Yahweh, and the sword that's also the word, that is now linked to the letter Pei through the number 17, which are the two numbers that make up the Ayin, which is this beautiful picture that we find in Revelation. I just found that interesting to see the concept, and it's actually not as weird as we think that there's a sword coming from the mouth of Messiah. It's actually his words, which is the letter Pei, that is depicted by this glowing sword that we read in Habakkuk. That is similar to the fiery arrows, but the arrows are designed for the hearts of man. The sword is designed to destroy his enemies, and that's the difference between the sword and the arrows, and the picture of Messiah having the sword in his mouth, basically speaking his word and destroying his enemies with the authority of his word. Now, Ayin on the Menorah pattern, when you write out the word Ayin, it's an Ayin Yod Nun, as you can see on the top right. Now, Yod is in the middle branch of the word Ayin, so that means it's the most important one, and it basically supports the concept of the Nun and the Ayin. Now, the Ayin is the eye, Yod is the invisible hand of Yahweh, and the Nun is fruit. Now, the fruit is also linked to Genesis 3 verse 5, and that's also where the Ayin, or the concept of the Ayin, is found. And that verse says, "For Elohim know that in the day that you eat thereof, your eyes, or Ayin, shall be opened," and that is the fruit from the tree. And he said that you shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. So this is the enchanter, or the serpent, the Nachash, who revealed secret knowledge to Adam and Chava, or Adam and Eve, regarding the forbidden fruit, which is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So when they indulge in this fruit, after they saw that the fruit was pleasant for the eye, they partook of this fruit, and then they got this revelation, or this promise given by the Nachash, that their eyes will be open. So they were expecting insight or enlightenment, but they actually got the opposite. They received blindness. And the blindness actually caused them to no longer see the things of Yahweh, because they were physically removed from him, and they lost their spiritual sight or ability to understand Yahweh's things. Now, the concept of opening the eyes, I looked at the word open, and that's the word pakach, which means to open, specifically the eyes and the ears. And that is basically the solution to the problem of the consequence of eating from this fruit. So the lie was embedded within the consequences, but their eyes were opened to their nakedness, but they received blindness in the spiritual. Now, in order to reopen the eyes in the spiritual, that's what this pakach is the word pakach is all about. And that word is found in Isaiah 42 verse 7, where it talks about opening up your eyes and giving sight to the blind, and also giving insight to someone who didn't know something previously. So that talks about spiritual sight, which is the sight that Adam and Chava lost. Now the passage in Isaiah 42:7 give us the answer to the problem. How do we overcome this blindness? It's through the opening of the eyes. Who is the one who's going to open the blind eyes? It's the one we read about in Luke 4:18, 7:22, and John 9:10 and 9:10 and 11. It is the work of the Messiah to restore the sight to the blind, but specifically spiritual sight, not physical sight, but spiritual sight. So the miracles he did were metaphors or pictures of opening up your spiritual eyes so you can see. Now that's where that Ayin is also connected to in relation to this, and specifically to the work of Messiah. Now, in relation to what we read about the archer and the arrows and the bow that shoot truth to us, receiving the arrows of light into our hearts, open up our hearts, and now we receive spiritual insight through those revelations. So his revelations is not something that happened over a period of time. It happens in an instant where you receive a revelation, but then there's consecutive times where you receive revelation upon revelation, but you have to interact with his word or his truth in order to receive them. You receive that initial revelation of Yahweh exists, he is the exalted one, and the truth about the Messiah, but from there on, you need to engage with his word to receive further insights into opening up your spiritual eyesight, receiving those arrows of light into your heart and into your mind. So looking at receiving eyesight and the work of the Messiah, the letter Ayin is found within the name Yeshua, and that's the letter on the left, which is the Ayin. Now, as you can see there from the little picture, the Ayin is the palm of the hand and also part of the arm that connects the hand to the rest of the body. So the Ayin is basically one of the most important parts of the hand. If you don't have that connection to the arm, your hand will be useless, being cut off. And also the fact that Messiah is known as the right hand of Yahweh, or the arm or the branch, the one that extends. So that's the concept of the Ayin. But what we see there is the fingers. The thumb represents the yod, which is the anointing, or the hand that gives insight. The shin is depicted by the three middle fingers, which make the crown, which make Yeshua the king. And then the pinky is the vav, which depicts him as man. So he became man, dwelt among us, and revealed himself to us, which is the concept of the Ayin, and also revealed the truth to us, so giving us spiritual eyesight. In John 8 verse 12, when Yeshua spoke again in the temple and said, I am the light of the world. Whosoever follow me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. So it's all about receiving light and no longer walking in darkness, of being blinded by the consequences of the sin of man having a fallen nature. So that is the restoration process, and it happens through receiving light from the fountain of light, which in this case is the extension of light from the source to where the source is required, to the concept of that picture of the lightning bolt coming down to the lowest potential from the highest potential, which depicts Messiah, the high light, which is the ore radiating from the Father, the originator of all light. Now, going back to the concept of the tree, we know that the eye saw the fruit in the tree of knowledge, and they wanted to have that fruit because it had this wonderful benefit of being like God. And then they ate from this tree. Now that tree, the forbidden tree, is the tree of knowledge. Now what we see is the three symbols, which is the man, the serpent, and the tree, which caused the fall of man. But the same three symbols also restored man. We have man, which is humanity. The serpent, the Nachash, is connected to Mashiach through Gematria. And then we also have the tree, where the Messiah died on the tree, or gave his life for us on the tree. And that reversed the effect of the fallen state that came through the Nachash, or the enchanter. So Yahweh used exactly the same symbolism and in restoring the things that were caused by the three things that were involved in the fall of man. Now, the two trees can be depicted by the letter Ayin connected to a tzaddik, which is the word etz, which is Ayin Vav Tzaddik, which is the second one. And the one prior to that is the Ayin Yod Nun, which is the word Ayin, but it looks exactly like Ayin Tzaddik, but the Tzaddik is broken. You can see the Tzaddik now consists of a Nun and a Yod, but the Yod is hovering above the Nun. It's no longer connected to the Nun. So it looks the same, but it's not really the same. So that is the tree of brokenness, or the tree that contains the fruit of duality, the fruit of good and the fruit of evil. And when you eat of that fruit, you will experience that same brokenness that the tzaddik experienced. Now, the tzaddik represent righteousness. Tzaddik means to be righteous. And when your righteousness is broken, you basically are in a state of brokenness, having the fruit of duality. So sometimes you eat the fruit of the good, sometimes you eat the fruit of evil, sometimes you are good, sometimes you're evil. Like Paul said, the good that I want to do, I do not do, and the evil that I don't want to do, I do. And that's the dilemma we face ourselves in, because we ate from that tree. Now, what Yahweh wants to do, he wants to fix that Nun and Yod together. But what happened was the Yod represent his hand, and he removed his hand. So we were only left with the Ayin and the Nun, which makes the word Anab, if you add the letter Bet. So how will we be restored? When we have the Ayin and Nun without the Yod, we need to go through the process of having the Anab. Now, Anab means fruit, but specifically a grape. And since the Nun also means fruit, we basically have two fruits, or double fruit. Now, double fruit is the meaning of Ephraim. So that means that we need to become part of Ephraim to enter into the Bet, because that's the solution of restoring the tzaddik. So Anan, or Anab, paints the picture of restoring humanity back into the house of Yahweh, which is the garden, through the concept of what he calls Ephraim. Now, Ephraim is also the two Nuns, which are the two fish, which is Pisces, the age of the Gentiles, which exist after the work of the Messiah. So that's where the restoration process started, through his work of his first coming, and it will be concluded through his second coming, where the Yod will come down and connect back to the Nun, making the tzaddik, or the righteousness, restoring that. So that's just a beautiful picture of the broken tzaddik that made up the Yod and the Nun. And the Ayin is still connected, just like with Etz, which make the word tree, but it's the broken tree, or the tree of knowledge, which is the tree of imperfection. Now, when we look at almost something, there's the word Yana. When you look at the brokenness of the tzaddik, it's the Yod Nun that make the word Yana, that means destruction. I don't know where that slide is. I missed it. Anyway, just take my word for it. So Yana, Yod Nun, represents the tree of knowledge. That's also the tree of destruction. And because it's the tree of dual fruit, it's the tree of duality. And that's also what Babylon is about. It's the mixing and confusion of the fruit, and that's basically what religion is. So having the tzaddik being broken created the system of duality, or the religious system called Babylon, that exists in a lower state, attempting to become tzaddik or to make you righteous. But it's a broken system. You need to reconnect the yod back to the nun, otherwise you have imperfection, and that can only be done by becoming part of Ephraim and going through the process. Now Ephraim is linked to David, and he had the prophecy of the branch growing over the wall into the field, and that's a picture of the followers of Messiah going into the world, getting people back into the garden and graft them back into the olive tree, which is the olive tree, which is also a picture of the tree of life, which is the tzaddik, Ayin tree, as depicted by the word etz, or tree. This is also an interesting picture. When we compare or with or, which is the light with the nakedness, and you draw them out and across each other diagonally, it actually creates two words. So on the top left we have Aleph, in the middle we have a Vav, and at the bottom right we have a Resh, which make up the word or, which means light, which sits on the side of the good fruit of the tree. And then on the other side we have Ayin, bottom left, Vav in the middle, Resh on the top right, which makes the word or, which means nakedness, which has to do with a fallen state. Now when we read that Resh Ayin at the bottom, it spells the word Ra, that means evil. That's the fruit of evil. And when we read the top of that two letters, it's Resh Aleph, which makes the word Ra'eh, that means to see, behold, and insight. So we can see the tree of good and evil have the link between or, and it also gives you the two fruit. The one that is the good fruit that gives you insight, the other one that's the evil fruit that gives you blindness, or that gives you the fallen state. And in the middle we have the Vav, which is man in humanity, that is entwined or captured or currently encapsulated within this world of duality, which is depicted by this tree of knowledge. Now, Ayin versus etz, this is where the Yana word comes in. This is just a further explanation of the broken tzaddik and the restoration of the tzaddik by adding the yod, or the hand of Yahweh, back to the nun, which is his fruit, which depicts the fruit of the Spirit, and that will restore your tzaddik, or your righteousness. And as we saw previously, the tzaddik depicts that robe of righteousness, or that glory that will cover you again. So when you have your tzaddik restored, when Yahweh look at you, he will see that perfect higher light, the same light that radiates from Messiah. You will be covered with that same light. And what also is evident, that this is not your light or your righteousness. You are covered with his light and his righteousness. And when the Father look at you, he see his Son's glory upon you, and he no longer see your nakedness or your sin. It's completely covered by his light, and there cannot be any darkness when there's light present. So that's a beautiful picture of that. What's also interesting is that the lower tree, which is the word Ayin, or the lower light, is depicted by the moon and the moon phases, which give you a lower intensity but a full image of what the pure light, which is depicted by the sun, can look like, which is a complete circle of light. But then there's a few stages of that light dimming into darkness up to a sliver, and then a dark moon, which show you the phases of man into the level of the Ayin, which is the lower light. And he wants to elevate us to a higher light, which is depicted by the sun. And that's where the sun and the moon come in, and that's also why the moon is present within the festivals and the cycles of the festivals, indicating those stages of restoration that takes place as we are exposed to the light of Messiah, which is the true or depicted by the sun. And at the end, the sun will be behind the woman, the moon, full moon at the feet, which are the two pictures of the fullness of light present within the woman, and that will be the sign prior to the coming of Messiah, or the full creation of man being depicted by the woman with the two lights present within her. And you can see the authority of the woman having authority over the lower light, the moon underneath the feet, and then the authority of the sun being behind her, which is the closest to her heart, which is the full illumination of the heart, the full revelation of Yahweh within her, and awaiting the presence of the Messiah. Genesis 2 verse 9 says, "And out of the ground made Yahweh Elohim to grow every tree that's pleasant for sight and good for food, the tree of life also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil." Now, the tree of knowledge is the phrase Da'at Tov Ve'Ra'ah, and that is basically summed up by the concept of knowledge, because knowledge is what the tree is made of, but it's got this imperfect fruit, or this broken fruit, which is the broken tzaddik. Now, knowledge is the means to restore the nun and the vav to become a tzaddik again, to become righteous again, so you can illuminate that light that you now be covered with. So only through knowledge of truth you can be restored from that broken state of yana, which is the yod nun, which means destruction, into righteousness, which means life. Now, knowledge is the word da'ath, which is dalet ayin taf. Ayin is in the center, so that's the key to go from the taf to the dalet, if you enter from the left to the right. Now, as I said, light is required, which is basically what knowledge is, and that's depicted by the letter Hey. But Hey is also the sound of breath. So this truth is carried by the spirit into the heart. So that's also what this arrow of light is depicted by the letter Hey, connected to his spirit. And that makes the word alive, or that light having the function of performing work within you, bringing your fallen state into a restored state. Now, to access the Ayin, to move to the Dalet, you have to go or enter into the Taf. Now, Taf means burden, yoke, and it also means death. And that's why we need to die to self, and that's what it means to be born again. You first have to die, and then you stand up in Messiah. That's what the mikvah or the baptism is all about. And after you die to yourself or become humble, and you realize that you are sinful, you have access to this Ayin, which are depicted in that picture, which has access to the or, the source of light which comes from Yahweh. And that or is only shining through the doorway of the Dalet. And we know that Messiah is the door. So he is the only one that releases this light through the lens of the Ayin into the lower world. After you died, he will resurrect you with his light that he shine upon you and restore you back to a glory state as man existed before sin came in the Garden of Eden. So that's just how Da'at or knowledge work. It's all about being humble, to die to self in order to receive the light, to enter through the doorway that leads to the Father, the originator of all light. Now, the last slide we're going to look at is the gematria of Ayin. And this is the Ayin Yod Nun, adding of those letters, which add up to 130. Now, there's a few interesting things that I just grouped together to give us a little bit of a storyline and also link to what we discussed. Now, the first word is Al-Gomim. That means a tree, specifically a tree in Lebanon. So that links to the tree of knowledge and also the tree of light, which is the fallen tree or the tree of destruction. And the other one is the righteous tree or the tree of light or the tree of life. Next one is Ayin. That's the eye, that spring, that's also a spring and a fountain, which is the origin or the gateway where the light shines through which you can access it. The next one is Salaam, which means ladder. And that's the word we looked at when we did this Torah portion on Jacob's ladder, which is basically a connection to Yahweh. Now, the ladder is as depicted through the lightning bolt and this high energy source, which is the Father, and the lower energy source, which is humanity in a fallen state. The Mashiach is the lightning bolt that connects Yahweh with the fallen man. Now, in the same way, it was depicted by the ladder connecting Yahweh to fallen man and the means to elevate and go up to the Father. It's the same way of receiving light that will raise your potential so you can elevate to a higher potential, no longer being destroyed, but becoming like him. And he is light. The next one is Pelek. That means whirl or spindle. That's that swirling motion that we discussed last time when we looked at the Samech and the relation to the Ayin as well. The next one is Kol. That means voice or sound. We know that light, when you slow it down, it actually becomes sound or frequency. Light is also a frequency. And the fountain of light is the eye, but your ear is a fountain of sound. So you can also receive something into your being through that fountain or through that gateway. And the sound is basically the word of Yahweh being spoken. And that's where you receive that through. Next one is Sinai, which means thorny. And that's linked to the crown of thorns, as well as the burning bush, as well as the 10 commandments, as well as the Feast of Shavuot, which is the center feast, the most important feast. The next word is ma'ak. That means to press, to squeeze, or to be pierced. And that links to Yeshua being the pierced one on the stake, wearing a crown of thorns. The next one is nesak, something poured out, a drink offering. And that's symbolism of Yeshua's blood being poured out for us. And also the symbolism of the wine at the Passover Seder. The next one is Hatzalah. That means deliverance or escape. And that links to Yeshua being the deliverer. The next one is Chenani. That means my salvation. And that's basically another way to express the word Yeshua, which is Yahweh is my salvation. And Yesah, that means Savior. Next one is Milkom, that means great king, which can also be pronounced as King of Kings. Hezekiah means Yahweh is my strength. That links to the Samech, that means strength. And also this light that you receive also gives you strength. And the last word is Nesek, that means riches or treasures. And that is the reward of being restored or being enlightened back into the Garden of Eden state by being exposed to the Ayin and to Yahweh's truth as we learn tonight. So that concludes our study. So I'm going to unmute you guys. If there's anybody who's got a question, you're welcome.
Because
Is there any questions or comments?
yeah, Philip, so Ayin is like a lens, isn't it?
Yeah.
While we're in our fallen state, it protects us from the awe of the Father. It filters us through what we need to see for creation, you know? So it does have a protective value for us while we're here in our fallen state.
Yep. Yeah, so the lower light is a safe kind of light. The higher light, our physical form, we will not be able to stand within the high light. It will be too much for us to absorb. So we need to be elevated in order to be able to stand in the high light, which is beyond the Ayin, which connects us directly to the ore or to the source of the light, which is the presence of the Father. So we need to go through the stages of being elevated by these arrows of light that we need to receive through revelation and receiving truth from His Word and from fellow believers growing together in the truth. So it's only the truth that can elevate you into that higher state. And that's why Lucifer lost the ability to share truth, because he could not be trusted. Now, when you read the story of the talents, it's basically the same principle. The ones that could not be trusted with the talent, it was removed from them and given to the one with the most talents. It's the same principle. And they became naked, not having any talents anymore. And someone else used it on their behalf. And they were basically stripped from their ability to mean anything within this process.
Yeah, thank you.
Another question. In Habakkuk, you quoted from Habakkuk 3:11 about the sun and moon stood still in their places at the flash of your flying arrows, at the brightness of your shining spear.
Yeah.
You marched across the earth with fury, you threshed the nations in wrath. Is that referring to Lucifer?
This is in context of judgment. So what we read in the book of Revelation, this is part of that context. So when Yahweh appears in the brightness of His coming, there will be nations that are opposing Him under the leadership of the opposer, and they will be threshed by His wrath. And His wrath is basically Him coming into the presence of humanity in a fallen state. And then you read Revelation about the thunders and the lightnings and all of those earthquakes happening. It's because of His awesomeness, of His power appearing in the midst of a fallen state of humanity. And that's basically what we read of in Revelation. So the nations here are basically those ones opposing truth, those ones who are naked, who love darkness to hide their nakedness. They are the ones who will bear the consequences because of their low potential. And Yahweh's wrath, or His presence, or His energy, or whatever you want to call it, will just be released upon them and destroy them if they don't have any light in them.
So would that then, would you be able to connect that with maybe the Hapazo or the rapture? Because then you're closer to Yahweh when the judgment comes onto the earth.
Yeah, when you think about the rapture, or the concept of the rapture and the gathering of the people in the air, that also links to the concept we discussed of being elevated, having a higher potential closer to Yahweh. You will not be affected as much as those who are still on ground level 0, having darkness and sinfulness in their lives. It's also a picture of that, and it links to the same symbolism.
Thank you.
Jacob, the root word or, to become naked, can we reference that to Adam and Eve after their sin?
Yep. Yeah, that's the word. Yeah, that's the exact word that we used after they sinned. They became naked. That's the word or, spelled with the Ayin. And that's the fallen state. That's why some believe that they were covered with glory, which is the light, the or, with the Aleph. And when they fell, they lost the light and the glory, and their nakedness appeared, which is the fallen state. So that also links to the fact that when you are covered with light, it's not only wearing a robe, not being naked. The robe has an effect on you, filling you with light and revelation, enlightening you, elevating you as well. So it's like being in a dark room and now you are in the light. It has an effect on you to be covered with light. It changes you. It's not just covering your nakedness. It's being elevated or having the ability of being fully immersed with all his revelation, his presence, and everything about him.
And I suppose too that would also be Yeshua's blood, because his blood covers our sin, covers us. And so I've always had a picture of when we stand before the judgment seat of God, that we are, what he sees when we have received Christ is that we are being covered in his blood. And that's
yeah, that's also when we looked at the broken tzaddik, and we look at the Ayin nun without the yod, and the word anab, that means fruit, specifically grape, and that's the symbolism of the blood. So when Yahweh removed his hand, the blood is required for us to receive the tzaddik again, to have the tzaddik restored, the righteousness restored, to access the tree of life.
So then the good fruit would be the grapes, then, perhaps.
Yeah, that's the picture of the wine at the Passover. Yeah, that's the good fruit. That's depicted by the yod. So there's a lot of symbolism that's intertwined. So you have to think about these things. I've been thinking about them for 2 weeks now. And they really sink in when you really meditate on them and think about it. But what's most fascinating to me was the concept of the source of light. If you look at the physical realm, like a screen, and there's a movie camera or a projector that's got information that's transferred through light. And what we perceive as reality is what actually comes from the light beyond, which is the spiritual realm. So the actual reality where things happen is the spiritual, and it's translated through the ayin or the lens and reflected on the canvas of the physical, and it plays off here. But we do interact in a physical fallen state with each other, but Yahweh wants to clean that lens because the ayin has been corrupted, or that tree of knowledge corrupted that lens. So that lens is now full of a few scratches, maybe a few splatters and whatnot. So the light is distorted. So the light on the spiritual is still pure, but as it shines through this broken lens of the ayin, it creates a fallen creation. So Yahweh wants to clean up everything and just keep on shining his pure light. And that's where the new heavens and the new earth concept comes from, where Messiah will do the work to perfect the light of the ayin again, to restore that broken tzaddik, to restore that concept of the tree of life, and to reestablish the Garden of Eden, and to cover man with his righteousness again.
And so that would also perhaps tie in with, it says like through a glass darkly, that we see the spiritual realm back the other way. It's the same thing. We see it through a distorted, being distorted through sin and darkness.
Yeah, the scripture talks about things that we perceive as a shadow, but I think it's not really a shadow like a dark shadow being casted. It's like that projects an image, but the real is in the spiritual. And we have a full color image, but it's in a flat dimension versus the three-dimensional image, for example, that's in spiritual, which is actually a high dimension at our 3 dimensions. So our dimension is like a dual dimension versus multiple dimensions in the spiritual. And we only see on a limited level of what the real is.
Oh, that was amazing. That was just amazing. Thank you,
Yeah, thank
Philip,
you,
so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was
A lot to take in there.
yeah, I think we better do a revision tomorrow.
That's it, exactly.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of information here. And we see it, and the imagery is in the beginning, in Genesis, as well as in Revelation. So the Ayin, or the topic of the Ayin, connects the beginning to the end, which create that cycle, or that connection of the Samech, where cycles continue. And that's also the number of Ayin, which is 70, which is cycles. So it connects the beginning with the end, and it restores the end back to the state of the beginning, the way Yahweh designed it to be.
Yes.
And that's the purpose of the Ayin.
And it's really interesting that sort of the analog world was more cycles. You know, you think of a watch with its workings and things like that. But the digital world is actually destroying that imagery.
Yeah, that's scattered and broken up in very small pieces. Yeah.
Yes. So because that's what the digital world is also frequency, isn't it?
Yeah.
But a distorted frequency.
Yeah.
That actually destroys, whereas Yahweh's actually makes whole.
Yeah.
The EMF disturbs the blood, apparently, in studies.
Yeah.
They look closely at the blood and see EMF, measure that, you know, and apparently it disturbs the blood. So they look into that a bit more. That's quite interesting.
Yeah.
Digital meters and things like that. So very interesting.
Yeah, because that's what Hashatan is called the principality of the air. And
Yeah.
that's what the digital realm is, his realm. And
Yeah. Yeah, and he works in the lower mediums, which is more sound, and he fell from the higher medium, which is light. That's why he's so musical and influence people in that space and entertainment. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. No more questions? People?
we need you down here, Philip.
Yes, we do.
Yeah. Well,
Philip,
thank you very much.
Philip, this is nothing to do with tonight's message that you've given us, this study, but you talk about us being part of Ephraim, but Manasseh was also blessed. So where does he ever fit into these studies that we do with you?
I looked at Manasseh within the Torah portion, but I can't remember what his name means. But his name, from memory, has got a negative connotation to it. So if you look at Ephraim and Manasseh, it depicts the two parts of the body. The one is imperfect and the one is more perfect. So Ephraim is the goal, how we want to be. And Manasseh was the fallen or broken one that's entrapped with religion, as far as I can remember. But collectively, they represent the full body of Messiah. Yeah.
I'm just writing this down with religion.
That was at Sukkot that we did that teaching.
Yeah.
Ephraim and Manasseh.
No, I remember I looked at the name.
Yeah.
But I think Manasseh means something like broken or something. I don't know. I can't remember.
Okay. Thank you anyway.
No worries.
I'll look up my past notes.
Yeah.
Thank
you.
you.
Can also have a look at the Torah portion Re'eh, because this also links to Revelation. having the Ayin or the spiritual sight restored. That also links to that Torah portion.
All right then. Thank you very much and good night, everybody.
Yes, bye.
Bye, darlings.
Good night.
Bye, Melanie.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye.